I didn't flinch when I signed the agreement. $2 million wired within 72 hours. No contest, no statements, no revisions. Just my signature at the bottom and a quiet understanding that I would disappear from the story. 6 months later, I stood at the back of a ballroom while my ex-wife raised a glass beside the man she replaced me with. And then someone cleared their throat. The envelope in their hand wasn't part of the program. If you think this is about revenge, stay with me. It isn't. It's about timing and what people choose to hide until they feel safe. Stay until the end, because what happened during that wedding toast didn't explode. It shifted, quietly. And that shift changed more than just their marriage. The ballroom lights were warm, soft amber against polished marble. Everything looked intentional, controlled, perfect. Marina always cared about presentation. She stood near the center of the room in a clean white dress that was elegant without being loud. Her new husband, Oliver, rested a hand at the small of her back as if he'd always belonged there. I kept my distance. No one stopped me at the door. No one recognized me immediately. That was the point. When I accepted the settlement, it wasn't because I needed the money. I needed the silence. Marina had framed the separation as a mutual decision built on emotional divergence. That was the phrase she used. Emotional divergence. It sounded clinical, mature, polite. It also erased 3 years of quiet arguments about things that never quite added up. The $2 million came from Oliver's family trust. It was structured as compensation for joint business interests. Clean, legal, efficient. What it really was containment. Marina didn't want complications during her engagement, and Oliver's family didn't want history resurfacing during a merger their company was negotiating. I signed because I was tired. Not angry, not broken, just tired. But I wasn't unaware. There were gaps in conversations that last winter, sudden fatigue, missed appointments, private consultations she said were routine. I asked questions, calm ones. She called it overthinking. I remember the night she said it. She was standing at the kitchen counter, folding a dish towel too carefully. "You're building stories in your head, Evan." That's my name, Evan Hale. I nodded like I believed her, and maybe part of me did. When someone says you're imagining patterns, you start checking yourself. You replay moments. You soften conclusions. You tell yourself you're projecting fear. By the time she filed for separation, she already had her next chapter lined up. The settlement was offered within weeks. Her lawyer framed it as closure. I read every clause twice. No disclosure of private medical history. That line caught my attention. I asked why it was there. The lawyer smiled gently. Standard protection language. I let it go, or at least I pretended to. Now, standing in that ballroom, watching her lift a champagne flute beside Oliver, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry. I was observant. People think heartbreak makes you reactive. Sometimes it does the opposite. It sharpens you. Oliver tapped his glass lightly with a fork. The room softened into attentive silence. He was confident, polished, the kind of man who rehearses gratitude in front of mirrors. "I'm grateful," he began, smiling toward Marina, "that life has a way of correcting course." There was polite laughter. Correcting course. I studied her face when he said that. She smiled, but her fingers tightened slightly around the stem of the glass. Micro movement, barely visible. Most people miss those things. I don't. I've worked in medical logistics for 12 years. I track irregularities, timelines, overlaps. Patterns tell stories long before people do. Marina always accused me of seeing connections that weren't there. Maybe she was right. Maybe that's why the medical report had been filed under restricted access last year. It wasn't addressed to me. It was requested by a private specialist, and it wasn't about me. I didn't discover it through hacking or drama. I found it because I was still listed as her emergency contact in an outdated system. A clerical error. Hospitals send automatic confirmations. Most people ignore them. I don't. The subject line was neutral, just a case reference number. But the attached summary included dates, the same dates she claimed she was visiting her sister. I didn't confront her. I waited. Not because I was plotting, because I needed certainty. The report referenced a pre-existing condition, long-term, not recent, and one particular line mentioned genetic markers. I stopped reading after that, not out of shock, out of recognition. Back in the ballroom, applause rippled as Oliver finished his toast. Marina leaned into him, perfect timing. That's when the third voice entered. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, just a controlled, slightly strained voice from near the head table. Before we continue, I think something needs clarification. Conversations paused in waves. Oliver turned first. Marina's smile didn't fall, it froze. At the edge of the table stood Dr. Samuel Kane. I recognized him instantly. He was the specialist from the report. He wasn't invited to celebrate. He wasn't family. He was standing there because silence had an expiration date. I didn't move. I didn't speak. And for the first time in months, I wasn't the one being told I was overthinking.
Dr. Samuel Kane did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. There is a certain tone professionals use when they know they are about to complicate a room. Calm, neutral, controlled. "I apologize," he said, holding a slim envelope in one hand. "I was informed that full disclosure had already taken place." You could hear the shift in the air. Not panic, not yet, just confusion. Oliver frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met." "We have not," Dr. Kane replied. "I've been consulting on a medical matter relevant to this union." Relevant to this union. Marina stepped forward just half a pace. Her body blocked him subtly, not aggressively, just enough. "Samuel," she said quietly, almost smiling, "this isn't the place." Her voice was composed, but I saw it. The slight tightening at the corner of her mouth, the inhale she held a fraction too long. He didn't look at her, he looked at Oliver. "I was under the impression," he continued carefully, "that genetic risk factors we discussed had been disclosed to both parties prior to marriage." There it was. Not an accusation, a clarification. Oliver's posture changed, not dramatically. His shoulders didn't slump, he didn't shout. He simply stopped smiling. "What genetic risk factors?" he asked. The room was silent now. No one laughed, no clinking glasses, just the low hum of air conditioning above us. Marina's hand moved to Oliver's wrist, a small gesture, containment. "We'll handle this privately," she said, her tone even. Dr. Kane's gaze shifted briefly toward her, then back to Oliver. "My responsibility," he said, "is to ensure informed consent, particularly when long-term implications are involved." He handed the envelope forward. No one rushed. Oliver hesitated before taking it. That hesitation told me everything. He hadn't known, and Marina knew he hadn't known. I stayed near the back wall, unnoticed. This wasn't my moment. It wasn't revenge. It was confirmation. Oliver opened the envelope slowly. Paper slid against paper, a single report summary page on top. His eyes moved left to right, then stopped. He read it again. Marina didn't look at the paper. She watched his face. I've seen that look before. Not fear, calculation. He didn't explode. That would have been easier. Instead, he asked a simple question. "When was this diagnosed?" Dr. Kane answered without hesitation. "Approximately 14 months ago." 14 months. I did the math instantly. That was 2 months before she asked for the separation. 2 months before she started saying we had grown apart. Oliver's fingers tightened around the paper slightly. "And this has hereditary implications?" he asked carefully. "Yes, significant ones," Dr. Keene said. A murmur moved through the nearest guests. Marina stepped in closer to Oliver, lowering her voice. I couldn't hear her words, but I could read the rhythm. Reassurance, minimization, framing. She was good at that. Reframing risk as complexity, turning omission into protection. "You're overthinking," she used to tell me when I noticed inconsistencies. Standing there, watching her body angle toward Oliver, I felt something I didn't expect. Not anger, relief. For months, I questioned myself. Maybe I had been paranoid. Maybe I had projected doubt onto normal medical privacy. But privacy isn't the same as concealment. Oliver looked up at Dr. Keene again. "Why are you bringing this up now?" Dr. Keene remained steady. "Because my office was notified this week that marital status had changed. My ethical obligation is to ensure both parties have acknowledged the risk profile." Marina's jaw tightened. So she hadn't informed the clinic of the wedding herself. Someone else had. I felt my stomach drop slightly. Not because I was surprised, because timing matters. Oliver turned toward her fully now. "You told me this was routine testing." "It was," she replied instantly. "It is." Her voice never cracked. "That report," she added, "reflects probability, not certainty." Technically true. She always chose technically true. Oliver glanced back at the paper. "Probability of what?" Dr. Keene did not answer immediately. He gave Marina a brief window. She didn't take it. "It's a degenerative condition," he said finally. "Late onset in most cases, but with strong genetic markers." The room felt smaller. No one moved. Marina stepped back slightly now. That subtle shift told me more than anything else. She was repositioning, not collapsing, repositioning. "I intended to explain," she said evenly, "in detail, privately, after the honeymoon." After the honeymoon. Oliver blinked once. "That's not disclosure," he said quietly. That sentence carried more weight than shouting ever could. I realized then that this wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about the settlement. It wasn't about betrayal. It was about control. Marina believed she could manage timing indefinitely, control narrative, control perception, control sequence. But timing has a way of exposing itself. Oliver folded the paper once, carefully, not dramatically, just once. "Is this why you wanted the settlement finalized so quickly?" he asked. There it was, a shift, not an accusation, alignment. I saw it in his eyes, the math connecting. She didn't answer immediately, and in that pause, something fragile cracked. Because silence in the right moment says more than explanation ever could. I felt my own doubt dissolve quietly. I hadn't imagined patterns. I had simply been early, and being early can look like paranoia to people who benefit from delay. Dr. Keene stepped back. "My responsibility ends with disclosure," he said calmly. "What you choose to do with that information is yours." He left without ceremony. No applause, no confrontation, just absence. Oliver remained still for several seconds. Then he placed the folded paper beside the champagne glasses. He didn't look at me. He didn't know I was there. But for the first time that evening, Marina looked uncertain. Not shattered, uncertain. And uncertainty is where control begins to slip.
No one rushed to fill the silence. That surprised me. Weddings are built to absorb discomfort. A joke, a song, a toast from someone else. But this room held still. Oliver didn't storm out. He didn't accuse. He picked up his glass, stared at it for a long second, then set it back down untouched. Marina tried to reset the tone. "Let's not turn this into speculation," she said, her voice smooth but thinner now. "Medical probabilities aren't certainties." A few guests nodded automatically. Polite reflex. Oliver didn't. He turned toward her fully. "You told me everything was disclosed," he said quietly. "It was," she replied, just as softly. I watched her shoulders. They were straight, but rigid. I knew that posture. It meant she believed she could still control the outcome if she stayed composed. 14 months ago?" he asked. "Yes. And you never mentioned hereditary risk?" "It's manageable." That word, manageable. Marina believed risk was something you staged carefully, something you introduced when it would cause the least disruption. She had staged our separation the same way. Gradual dissatisfaction, emotional drift, mutual decision. She never said the word illness. Not to me. Oliver leaned slightly closer to her. His voice dropped. "Did you think I wouldn't care?" That question wasn't angry. It was hurt. And that was worse. Marina hesitated for the first time, just half a second. "I thought it was premature to create fear," she said. Create fear. That's how she framed it. Not concealment, protection. I felt something shift inside me then. For months I had wondered if I was the unreasonable one, if I demanded transparency too early, if I forced conversations before she was ready. But watching her now, I understood something uncomfortable. She didn't delay out of fear. She delayed out of strategy. Oliver glanced at the folded report again. "What's the likelihood?" he asked. "Statistically significant," she said. He looked back at her. "That's not an answer." She inhaled slowly. "It's around 60%. A quiet murmur passed through the room. 60%. I closed my eyes briefly. That number had stared back at me from the summary page months ago. I hadn't confronted her. I told myself maybe I misread it. Maybe it wasn't relevant to me. Maybe I was overthinking. Now I knew. Oliver stepped back slightly. 60% chance of what? Someone asked from a nearby table. Marina turned toward the voice sharply. "This is private." It had been private. Until timing failed. Oliver shook his head slowly. "You didn't trust me with this." "I was going to." "When?" Her silence answered for her. Not because she had no explanation, because she had no date. Marina believed in presenting information when it served stability, not when it served truth. I thought about the settlement again. $2 million wired quickly. Non-disclosure language about medical history. At the time, I assumed it was protection for her privacy. Now I saw another angle, risk management. Oliver's family had invested heavily in him, in legacy, in future projections. Health matters, genetics matter. Marina understood that. Oliver looked out at the guests briefly, then back at her. "Does my family know?" he asked. "No." "Did you intend to tell them?" "Eventually." That word again. Eventually. It has no date attached. Oliver exhaled slowly. "I asked you directly before we set the wedding date. I asked if there was anything I needed to understand long term." Marina nodded. "And I told you it was routine." "Yes." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse her of betrayal. He simply said, "That's not the same thing." The weight of that sentence settled into the room. For the first time, Marina's composure flickered. Her fingers tapped lightly against her glass, unconscious, repetitive. I recognized it from our final months together. It meant recalculation, not regret, recalculation. Oliver turned toward the small table near the head of the room. His father sat there, watching, not speaking, just observing. That silence carried authority, more than shouting ever could. Marina noticed it too. Her posture softened slightly. "Oliver," she said quietly, "this doesn't change who I am."
It changes what you withheld. There was no anger in his tone, just clarity, and clarity is harder to argue with. For a moment, I felt an unexpected pull of sympathy, not for Marina's decision, for the unraveling. Because when narrative control slips, it doesn't explode, it thins, and thinning can feel worse. I questioned myself again briefly. Had I done the right thing by staying silent all these months? Should I have confronted her earlier? Should I have refused the settlement? But standing there, I realized something important. This moment didn't require me. It unfolded without my interference, which meant it was never about revenge. It was about exposure through timing. Oliver picked up the folded paper again. "I need air," he said quietly. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone else. He simply walked toward the terrace doors. Marina didn't follow immediately. She stood still, watching him leave. That was new. During our marriage, she always followed first, controlled the recovery. Now she hesitated, and that hesitation was the first genuine crack. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just visible. I stepped away from the wall then. No one stopped me. No one noticed. As I walked toward the exit, I caught one final glance of her face. Not angry, not broken, just aware that timing had shifted. And when timing shifts, so does leverage.
The terrace doors closed softly behind Oliver. Cold night air spilled briefly into the ballroom before sealing again. No one resumed the music. Guests didn't know where to look. At Marina, at each other, at their phones. Social discomfort is quiet. It doesn't scream. It waits for instruction. Marina remained near the head table for several seconds after Oliver stepped outside. She didn't chase him. She scanned the room, not frantically, methodically. Who was watching? Who was whispering? Who was neutral? That was always her strength. She didn't respond emotionally first. She assessed. Then she moved. She walked toward Oliver, not hurried, controlled, as if this was still recoverable. I had already reached the exit, but I didn't leave. I stepped into a narrow hallway that ran along the ballroom's side wall. From there, the terrace doors were visible through glass. Oliver stood with his back to the railing. Marina approached slowly. She didn't touch him immediately. She stood beside him, facing the city lights. Silence stretched between them. From inside the ballroom, faint murmurs continued. Then Oliver spoke. "You told me your divorce was mutual." "It was," she said. "You said there were no external pressures." "There weren't." "That wasn't a lie. It was incomplete." Oliver turned toward her. "Was this diagnosed before or after you separated from Evan?" "Before." I could see it in her posture, the slight pause. "Before," she admitted. He nodded once. "Did he know?" "No." That part was technically true. I hadn't confronted her, but I had known. That's the difference. Knowing without confrontation feels like doubt. Hearing confirmation feels like alignment. Oliver rubbed his forehead lightly. "You let me believe you were free of complications." "I am," she said quickly. "This doesn't define me." "It doesn't," he agreed, "but concealment does." That word landed heavier than anything else said tonight. Concealment. Marina turned fully toward him now. Her voice shifted. Not defensive. Reasonable. "I didn't want us to build our marriage on fear," she said. "I wanted us to start stable. You don't create stability by withholding. You create panic by oversharing risk." They weren't shouting. They were debating ethics. Two intelligent people arguing timing. That was the tragedy of it. Marina believed she was protecting the future. Oliver believed protection required transparency. Neither thought they were malicious, but intention doesn't erase impact. Inside the ballroom, Oliver's father stood. He didn't interrupt. He didn't approach. He watched. That silence carried consequence. Oliver followed his father's gaze briefly, then looked back at Marina. "My family needed to know this before legal commitments," he said quietly. "I would have told them." "When?" There it was again. No date, no anchor.
Marina's composure thinned slightly. "You're reacting emotionally. That line used to be directed at me, and hearing it again clarified something. Labeling emotion as irrational is a strategy. It shifts focus away from the original issue." Oliver didn't accept it. "I'm reacting logically." Another silence. Wind brushed across the terrace. Marina's hair moved slightly. She stepped closer to him now. "I didn't lie," she said. "You omitted. I planned to disclose. You planned to control timing." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse her of betrayal. He simply named the pattern. And naming a pattern removes its power. For a moment, Marina didn't respond. Her eyes moved briefly toward the ballroom doors. She understood optics. She understood that prolonged absence created narrative. She looked back at Oliver. "Do you want to cancel tonight?" she asked quietly. That question surprised me, not because it showed weakness, because it showed calculation. If he said yes, she could frame it as medical transparency. If he said no, the wedding would continue, and disclosure could be reframed later as responsible caution. Oliver inhaled slowly. "I don't want to cancel," he said. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "I want to pause," he added. That shifted everything. Pause. Not rupture, not performance. Pause. Marina blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means we delay final legal consolidation until we process this properly." The business language wasn't accidental. Their marriage had financial implications. Trusts, mergers, future planning. 60% genetic risk wasn't a romantic problem. It was a strategic one. Marina's jaw tightened subtly. "You think I was manipulating you. I think you were managing perception." He didn't say it harshly, just clearly. And clarity is difficult to deflect. Inside, guests had started to sit down slowly. Conversation resumed in low tones. No explosion, no dramatic exit, just recalibration. Oliver stepped toward the doors. "I need to speak with my father," he said quietly. Marina didn't stop him. She stood alone on the terrace. For the first time all evening, she wasn't directing anything. She wasn't framing. She wasn't reassuring. She was simply still. I stepped away from the hallway quietly. This was no longer my place to witness. As I reached the building exit, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just resolution. Because the story had corrected itself without my involvement. I hadn't needed to expose. I hadn't needed to confront. Timing did what emotion could not. And Marina, for the first time, had to sit inside uncertainty instead of controlling it.
The wedding did not end that night. It continued. Music resumed, guests finished their meals, a cake was cut. But the tone changed. Not visibly to outsiders. The staff did their jobs, the lighting stayed warm, the champagne kept moving. What shifted was internal. Oliver returned to the ballroom after speaking with his father. His expression was composed, not angry, not defeated. Composed. Marina met him halfway. No public conversation, no dramatic gesture, just two adults adjusting posture. I didn't stay much longer. I stepped outside into the quiet parking lot and let the doors close behind me. For months I had wondered whether I misjudged her, whether I projected distrust where none existed. That doubt dissolved fully that night. Not because she was cruel, not because she was reckless, because she prioritized timing over trust, and timing is a form of control. 2 weeks passed before I heard anything, not from Marina, from a mutual acquaintance. The legal consolidation of Oliver's family trust had been delayed indefinitely. The wedding license remained valid, they were technically married, but the merger attached to that union had paused, quietly. No press release, no scandal, just delay. Marina sent me a message 3 weeks later, not emotional, not apologetic, just brief. It assumes you attended. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't accuse me of interfering. She simply acknowledged presence. Yes, I replied. There was a long pause before her next message. You could have told him. That sentence held more weight than any argument. I stared at it for a long time. I had considered telling Oliver months ago, when I first read the summary, when I realized the diagnosis predated our separation. But something held me back. Not revenge, not fear, just clarity. If I intervened, I would become the narrative, the jealous ex, the unstable voice. By staying silent, the timeline spoke for itself. I didn't need to, I replied. Her response came slowly. You always think you're observing objectively. I almost smiled. I observe patterns, I wrote back. No immediate answer. Then, you think I was dishonest. I considered that carefully. No, I typed. I think you manage information. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. That's not the same as deceit. It depends on timing. Silence followed. Days later, I heard through another channel that Oliver had requested independent genetic counseling, not because he didn't trust her, because he needed his own framework. Trust doesn't erase risk, it acknowledges it. Months passed. The marriage did not implode. It stabilized differently. Oliver remained cautious, legal agreements restructured, health contingencies documented. Marina stayed, but something in their dynamic shifted permanently. Transparency now required documentation, verification, not assumption. And that shift wasn't dramatic, it was structural. As for me, I invested part of the settlement into expanding my logistics consultancy. No flashy moves, no sudden wealth, just quiet growth. I stopped replaying the past, stopped analyzing every moment of our last year together, because the answer was simple. She didn't see omission as betrayal. She saw it as strategy. I needed something different. Months later, Marina and I met for coffee. Neutral space, neutral tone, no hostility. She looked composed, as always. "How are you?" she asked. "Steady," I replied. She nodded. There was no tension between us, just acknowledgement. "I didn't think you would attend," she said. I didn't think I would either. She studied me for a moment. "You don't seem angry." "I'm not." That surprised her. I expected something else. "I already processed it," I said. She looked down at her cup. "I didn't want fear to define my future." "I know." "And you?" "I didn't want doubt to define mine." That landed quietly between us. No apology, no dramatic reconciliation, just clarity. Before we stood to leave, she said something that felt honest. "I didn't think timing would matter that much." "It always does," I replied. Not as accusation, as fact. We parted without lingering. No hostility, no longing. Just two people who approached uncertainty differently. The wedding night didn't collapse everything. It clarified everything. For Oliver, it introduced caution into optimism. For Marina, it removed the illusion that timing can indefinitely control outcome.
For me, it erased doubt. Not about her character, about my perception. Sometimes the truth doesn't explode, it surfaces, quietly. And when it does, it doesn't demand revenge, it demands adjustment. That was the real shift. Not the medical report, not the settlement, not the toast, just clarity. And clarity is quieter than people expect.